Welcome to Africa Insight. In this week's video, we actually have a special one. So Louw and myself will be unpacking some of the key political events that have happened across the continent. So a bit of a back-looking approach. If you want something that's more forward-looking, we've recorded a Africa Watch List 2026, and the link for the video can be found in the description. So Louw, what's been troubling you in the countries that you've covered this year?
Well, perhaps the main development in my region is right here in South Africa, of course, where the Government of National Unity has had quite the spectacular year. You'll recall, Jervin, that we got off to a pretty good start on February 7th when Cyril Ramaphosa delivered his State of the Nation address. It was very well enthusiastically received by his coalition partners, but then literally 2 weeks later, the wheels came off when Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana was supposed to deliver his budget speech. And so without going through all the drama that had followed thereafter, we did go through a period where it seemed like the GNU might not actually hold it together.
Sure.
There were times where specifically members of the ANC were quite outspoken and were seemingly daring the DA to leave the GNU, and also started looking around for other coalition partners to shore up the coalition. The appropriations bill was passed, of course, then July 23rd. It took longer than ever before. But we've also seen the coalition learn from some of the mistakes they made this year. And so we had a GNU retreat in the first week of November.
That's nice.
The retreat was briefed by the finance minister, who then went on to deliver his medium-term budget policy statement 2 weeks later. This time around, they made sure that everyone was on the same page, and the midterm budget was delivered and supported by the whole coalition, and we seem back on track. But it's perhaps a timely reminder of how quickly things went from effusive applause in the start of February to the coalition completely tearing each other apart a couple of weeks later. And since we're moving into a local government election year next year, we have to be mindful of this and go that the GNU, even though at the moment it looks like it's quite coherent and cohesive, things can change quite quickly.
Yeah, for sure.
At the same time, there are also leadership issues that we need to watch out for next year. John Steenhuisen, the leader of the DA, is going up to elective Congress in April. And he's been involved in some scandals recently. Well, scandals, let's just say some internal spats.
Yeah.
A minister he recalled, and then some dirty tricks in the media. So perhaps we'll go into that elective conference not as confident as he otherwise would have been. The same can be said for Cyril Ramaphosa. He is president of the ANC until at least 2027, but there's already talk in the succession battle. The NGC is taking place this week, and so we're already seeing challenges emerging, names being thrown around in the public domain, and the big question being posed is: should Ramaphosa be trusted with another election? He has now been in charge of the ANC for 3 consecutive elections. 2 of those were general elections, 1 of those were local elections, and we've seen a very, frankly, a precipitous decline in electoral fortunes for the ANC. And some people are starting to ask the question, should he lead the party into another election? I would say that Ramaphosa would likely not be replaced ahead of the 2026 local government elections, but we've also seen the last 2 presidents not go the full term.
No one's been there. Yeah.
Yeah, so if that trend continues, then what happened to Mbeki, what happened to Zuma might happen to Ramaphosa as well. And so that's why events of this year will very much echo into events of next year. And that will give me plenty of grey hairs. I've had plenty this year. I'll add some more next year. What's added to your grey hairs this year?
Yeah, the main one is East Africa has been very busy, and my region's also in West. But I would say the one that probably stands out for me is the DRC, Rwanda, the conflict, M23, Great Lakes area, that's consistently just been a troubling area. So you would have seen over the last couple of days, President Trump managed to get Tshisekedi and Kagame to sign an agreement, the so-called peace deal, and within a day later, M23 were again fighting against the government.
Again, the body language between those 2 leaders in front of the cameras was atrocious.
Yeah, they didn't even shake hands at all. Their foreign ministers actually shook hands in the earlier agreement, but those 2 it felt very forced when I was watching it. It looked really forced. So again, Rwanda, they are quite adamant that they will only find some. Also, here's an interesting thing. If Rwanda keeps saying they're not involved in the conflict, this is something I was thinking about yesterday, why would they sign in a peace deal with the DRC?
Indeed,
it makes no sense, right? But if we break down the conflict, Rwanda's main concern is they still believe the FDLR, the remnants of the group that committed the genocide, they're still in the DRC. So once they're neutralized, Rwanda would be happy. The Congolese say that on their side, they're not holding this group, and that the Rwandans want to get hold of their resources. As we know, the DRC is wealthy in a plethora of resources. And then M23 have their own thing. They want to protect ethnic Tutsi interests in the Congo. And then you have the AFC, which is the Congo River Alliance, with Joseph Kabila and a couple of other enemies of Tshisekedi who want to overthrow him, or at least challenge him. So it's super complicated. And this deal, as I've mentioned in many of our notes and talking to our clients, is that it's short-term gain. It's not really addressing the real core issues that affecting the DRC. So that's really been a thing. And there's also some rumors this year of a possible coup. There was an very attempted poor coup last year. So Tshisekedi has sort of reshuffled and moved people around. So on the coups thing, actually, Louw, if I think about it, in another one of my big countries, Nigeria, there were rumors of a coup not earlier this year, a couple of months ago. President Tinubu quickly reshuffled his cabinet. This all has to do with some of the inadequacies of the army in dealing with the terrorism issues, the kidnapping of girls, all these nasty businesses. But then we also had some pretty poor organized coups. We had a failed one now in Benin, which was like just two guys trying to go and take it out. And then in Guinea-Bissau, where president didn't like how the results were and sort of tried to do that. But I think you had a more interesting one in a country we don't actually talk that much, the vanilla paradise of Madagascar.
That's true. And the Southern Africa region in general hasn't seen a lot of coups. In fact, we haven't had one since 2017 when the current president of Zimbabwe disposed then President Robert Mugabe.
Yes.
So that was the last coup. Then protests erupted in Madagascar over shortages or disruptions to water and electricity supply, a long-standing issue. But the protests escalated quite quickly. The police fired on protesters, really just inflaming the situation. And then within perhaps 2 weeks of that happening, we saw this elite military unit move in, declare that they're in charge, and long-standing President André Rajoelina on a French military plane hot-footing it out of the country.
If I'm not mistaken, he came in on the coup, right?
That's right. So in 2009, he was the head of a protest movement against then-President Marc Ravalomanana, and he basically swept into power on the back of, again, it's a soft coup, then gave up the presidency for a 5-year period, then came back and became president legitimately in an election. He's been in charge pretty much the entire period. But obviously people's patience have run out. The last 2 elections in Madagascar have been problematic. And so I think we were all just very surprised by just how quickly events moved, how quickly we went from these protests. At the same time, of course, the media tried to cast the Madagascar protests as the latest Gen Z protests, because there were a lot of youth involvement. There was the One Piece flag spotted in the crowd in certain places. But what's a little bit sad is that Madagascar became the chairperson of SADC only a month before the coup. And because of everything that's happened there now, they've been suspended by the AU. They've lost that chairmanship now. It's gone back to South Africa. And so Madagascar had an opportunity this year first time that they've been chairperson of SADC. But now we wait and see.
And it's so important, it's very important for like smaller countries per se to be in those roles, agenda setting, because they don't often get those opportunities.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yes, and so they also hosted the summit then that month before, and they did a pretty good job of that. Brought all these high-profile leaders to Antananarivo. That doesn't happen very often. But now we have to see again. We have to see, they have a government now that's half military, half civilian. Now we have to see whether or not do they stick to these timelines they've set themselves for return to civilian rule. And can these two parties work together in trying to restore civilian rule? But perhaps on that, it's worth noting that there is one country that has seen some progress this year in terms of returning to civilian rule, that being Gabon.
Yeah, so we saw there a nice return to civilian rule, and within the timelines, we've been monitoring some of the deals around the IMF, so which is good for the economic development. So there's at least some hope. There's the trend. We've been tracking it, particularly West Africa is not looking good. So I think that's at least some positive signs. But then, you mentioned about unrest, and it makes me think again, another coup, and yesterday were the anniversary of independence celebrations in Tanzania. They had elections also.
That's right.
President Hassan won by a landslide, but it was marred by extreme violence. During my coverage of the protest, it was really difficult to get hold of journalists because there's an internet blackout for it's almost 10 days. And we had clients who were quite concerned about their people. And the reason why I'm also saying that is about a coup is because yesterday, if you protested in Tanzania by law, it was an emergency law, if you protested, that would be deemed as a coup. That is how strict they got yesterday. So there was very, very small protest. But yeah, it's quite concerning because on my side, Tanzania, and there's also maybe some room for also a bit of a conspiracy theory, which I just want to mention quickly, is that Tanzania had been showing all the good signs. So in my politics coverage and chatting to our economist Shani, we've been tracking it. Tanzania is really heading in the right direction economically, politically it's lagging behind. And Hassan initially showed some promise, but now all of the stuff has gone on. The EU are pulling funding, the US are pulling funding, which I think will take us to our next point. But yeah, it's quite concerning. And sorry, just on the conspiracy theory, there's a rumor that a lot of the protests, I know our job is to wade through all the messiness, but sometimes we need to entertain these things. But a lot of the protests, they said, were encouraged by Kenyans because, that Kenya and Tanzania have a very healthy rivalry. And a lot of when you look at the heat maps, a lot of the problems on the borders between Kenya and Tanzania. But yes, as I said, the US are currently looking at taking a lot of money away from Tanzania in terms of funding. And that makes me departure to our point. So what's the US interest been like in Africa in your view? And obviously, Trump's been giving a lot of African countries, particularly ours, a hard time.
Well, perhaps before we move on to talking about Trump, it's perhaps worthwhile to point out that Mozambique went through something similar.
Yes, correct. Yes,
the end of 2024, a very messy election, and then an extremely bloody post-election period. Again, the country was on a good growth trajectory. There were signs that the LNG projects were going to come back online, and all of that was interrupted by this election and then the election-related violence that followed thereafter. Now we have seen this year something of a compromise being reached by the political actors in that country, but a huge hit to the economy, and again, a huge hit moving forward as aid is being withdrawn from Mozambique because of that messy election period that we saw. Internationally speaking, this really has been the year of Trump, and that has resonated in Africa, in South Africa in particular. And I think we all remember that extraordinary meeting in the White House when Ramaphosa became the first African head of state to go and see him, then accused of genocide, and a relationship with the US really has only deteriorated since. Of course, in November, South Africa had the G20 summit, hosted a very successful summit.
Yeah, definitely very successful.
But of course, the US was absent, and we've seen since the presidency of the G20 has then passed to the United States, the US becoming even more adversarial towards South Africa, making it clear that they don't want us to be part of the G20, they don't want the country to come to next year's summit, which, as I see in the news this morning, is going to be held in a Democrat-led city of Miami. But just because South Africa's had a terrible year with its relations with the US doesn't mean that every African country has suffered. There have been some countries that had the red carpet rolled out for them in the middle of the year. I believe there were these four countries, four African heads of state that were invited to the White House.
But these were like if you think about strategic, these were very like odd countries.
Very, very odd choice of countries. And I don't know if those countries really got anything out of that meeting. End of the day, it's been one of those years where the Americans blow hot, they blow cold, and Africa certainly isn't on the agenda for the US. Although having said that, it seems that AGOA is back on the congressional
Well, we're
calendar.
hoping, as of recording, they'll be voting later today. There's rumors are they're going to extend it for 3 years. Yeah. Some are pushing, I was reading in the Kenyan media, because Kenya have a special relationship with the US, they're hoping for 5. So, yeah.
Yeah, but I think we could probably also assume that in doing so, certain countries will be excluded, South Africa being one of those. But it's interesting that you should allude to Kenya. That is a special relationship, and that's something we had said even before Trump returned to the White House, that a Trump White House would become more transactional.
Yeah.
A Trump White House would prioritize bilateral relations, special relationships, like with a country like Kenya.
It's a non-NATO ally as well. Yeah.
Exactly. Instead of having a broad sweeping relationship with a continent. Ruto, of course, was also present in Washington for the signing of the DRC Rwanda peace deal. And so South Africa goes into the new year. In many ways, it feels like President Cyril Ramaphosa has given up on trying to repair that relationship. We saw his spokesperson even tweet that it's basically going, it's just a year. A year from now, the presidency passes to the UK and we'll return to normal service. Yeah. So we maybe just have to ride out this year with the Trump administration. But international relations are shifting end of the day. And we're seeing increasingly countries working on the relationship with African countries, whether or not it be the Chinese, the Indians. The UAE is massively invested, particularly in your region, in East Africa. We're seeing massive investment sometimes also from Turkey. And again, depending where on the continent you are, African countries are not solely dependent on the United States, although they would certainly want the relationship to be better.
Yes. Also on the solely dependent, I think maybe one last one, just to quickly wrap up is on Nigeria. Nigeria took a similar stance to South Africa, and I kind of do appreciate the steadfastness in the sort of strength. Whereas I think we can give Cyril, he looked at least a bit strong. We did say in a lot of your TVs, you said he came across strong in his leadership. But President Tinubu has done the same in Nigeria. He's been quite firm against Trump's allegations of this Christian genocide. But just as a caveat, look, there are Christians that are targeted by violence, and obviously they will feel that they are being targeted. But based on my coverage, every week there's a terrorist attack or kidnapping. It doesn't make the media, and they attack everyone. Boko Haram, ISWAP attack everyone.
Indeed.
But the reason why I'm saying this is, a big part of my thinking is the only reason why Nigeria are being targeted as well is because they have said no to migrants. They don't want, whereas the US has struck deals with some of your countries, Eswatini, Ghana has a deal, Uganda has a deal, Rwanda has a deal. They're all very transactional, as you mentioned. But the Nigerians basically have said, obviously Nigeria's population thinks well over 200 million. It's a massive country with its own socioeconomic challenges. And it said, we can't take migrants. So I think that's also annoyed the U.S. quite a bit, and those tensions are. And when I compare the two, when I look at your coverage of South Africa and seeing how the U.S. South Africa relations have deteriorated, the Nigeria one is showing the same trends. It's heading in the same way. So it's concerning, but I think we'll see how it goes. Nigeria said they're willing to talk, but as we've seen, dealing with the Trump presidency is not a straightforward one.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of countries who thought that perhaps they could be the Trump whisperers, that they had the secret sauce, they had the right approach. They were going to bend the knee and they were going to flatter Trump. And perhaps it is working for some countries, but it is perhaps a temporary reprieve for those countries. Generally speaking, the Trump administration is not interested in Africa. We know that much is clear. But returning perhaps just briefly to the G20, we did see a lot of support come for South Africa, come from our traditional historical partners in the European Union. We also then went straight from a G20 summit to an AU-EU summit in Luanda the week thereafter. These presidents, like Emmanuel Macron, Prime Minister Keir Starmer, those individuals went straight from Johannesburg to Luanda to participate there. European countries see their relationship with African countries as an important and strategic one. Yeah. And so while those relationships are deteriorating with the US, we've seen some notable support come from Europe in particular. The French, of course, would be very concerned about loss of influence in their historical colonies. But lots of support from that side. And then, of course, also the enlarging of the BRICS bloc, which now, of course, also includes Ethiopia and Egypt. Yeah. And other African countries are knocking on that door.
So to get on that. Then just on that one, Louw, before we conclude, actually just as a side note, and just to reaffirm, maybe people thought the international liberal order, we've had these debates, is it declining? But the G20 shows that it's still there, it's important. Ethiopia has been announced as the host of COP32, so they don't have, and that also they had significant support from the African bloc within negotiations and the Europeans. So obviously the Americans under Trump presidency are not interested in COP. But then there's another shoe in the hat that things might be in the right direction.
Absolutely. Shall we leave it at that?
Yeah, I think we should.
Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you again in the new year.
Thank you for joining Africa Insight this week. If you'd like more information on our products or services, please visit our website or socials.